the first non-fiction in, if I'm not mistaken, 16 years.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Why tackling the origin of language, such a complicated, complex and complicated topic?
It's something I stumbled upon. I was doing it was actually a talk with the title of The Human Beast, which is from Zola,
Yeah.
La Bête Humaine. And then I discovered that he arrived at that title because he'd become interested in Darwin. And the idea he took from Darwin is that, well, we're all animals. And so he has these 4 animalistic murderers. And each one is separate from the other, and it's killing all over the place. And I had never been interested in the theory of evolution. Frankly, it was pretty boring. But when I found out that this was really the source of Zola's whole idea, I figured, well, maybe I should take a look at it. Zola, incidentally, is my favorite novelist of all time. I think his type of realism is out of style, but I think it's great. In any case, I then started thinking about evolution and and at some point you get to speech if you start studying it, and there is no explanation within the theory for speech. It has no source in animal life whatsoever, and the more you think about it, it's by far the most powerful weapon, if you will, that human beings have. And my conclusion is it's man-made. It didn't evolve. It was a technique that somebody somewhere picked up. And the great downfall of all evolutionary theories is that is the supposition that there's a history, and if you can only dig out the history, you can explain it. Well, there is no history that you can get to, and why I now have come to the conclusion that why evolution should be believed in any more than any other myth, like the Navajo Indians in America believe the world started with a little, in the middle of nothing, a little disc appears, and this is in the book, of course. But,
Yes.
And there's this little man curled up inside the disc, and he wakes up and he is nobody there. He feels absolutely lonely. So he gets some dirt or something, and he makes another little man. And I think the fact that that's impossible didn't get in the way of form of theories, whether it's, you can go all over the world and find them. And it just so happens that the latest myth started in a rational age.
Yeah.
So you have to have a rational, and there's essentially no evidence. There's just bones. And I don't know what those bones don't really tell you very much. Now they're working with DNA, but I think a mouse and a human being have 99.5% of the same DNA. So it's not the most trustworthy measurement. Anyway, that's how I got.
Okay. from custom cars in the 60s to sex in the campus in 2010 or so. Do you like being outside of your intellectual comfort zone? Apparently.
Well, I'm such a newspaper man in a way that I'm always looking for something that's absolutely new. And that was, to me, custom cars were absolutely new. And they were new in the sense that there was a coterie of a small one of people who made these things. But they were not, their existence was not widely known. And in the case of the astronauts, of course, everybody knew about the astronauts, but they did not know their motivations or what they were really worried about. And at first they were really worried about the fact that they were not great pilots. They kept trying to think of themselves as great pilots. But they were chosen because they could take the strain, not because they could fly the plane. And people like great pilots like Chuck Yeager didn't even want to be astronauts at first. They thought of it as, they called it spam in a can. You're just a piece of meat in a can that is sent up into space. After a while, I think they wouldn't have minded becoming astronauts because astronauts got so much
recognition,
publicity, and this is, I think somewhere in the book I made a reference to the fact that in the era of single combat, where each side had a, it would be David against Goliath. In that period, you had to glorify these. They were all going to die. You have to glorify them a lot, to the point where they can't back out. And that held over with the astronauts. It was a foregone conclusion that this is about as dangerous a thing as you could do, and it was dangerous.
Yeah, it was.
And of course, the worst accident came when they decided to introduce it to the public. They were going to start taking the public up. So they took this teacher.
Yeah, poor teacher.
Miss McAuliffe.
Yeah.
And that was the end of bringing the plain folks into the space program.
Yes.
I shouldn't laugh.
I would go to another very important staple of your poetic in a way, which is status. Wallace and Darwin, I would say Wallace versus Darwin and Everett versus Chomsky. I mean, you stress a lot their class differences. I mean, a flycatcher towards the ivory tower guy, Mr. Chomsky, and then the same went for Wallace versus Darwin. Can you explain to me why status is still so important for you?
It's the first thing. I mean, first let me say, there are many theories of life, but I think any theory is better than none. Because at least it forces you to compare things, and I'm convinced that that status is the greatest single motivation that human beings have, and even if I'm wrong, it certainly makes you compare people very closely, and those were fairly obvious gaps. The more interesting gap was really between Chomsky and Everett.
Yeah.
Everett had two strikes against him because he started off as a preacher missionary.
Yeah.
And oh my God, that's so looked down upon among intellectuals. And when I talked to Chomsky for the book, I started asking him about Everett, and he said nobody pays any attention to him anymore. It's the subject is closed. Why bring it up? And he managed to pretty much cast Everett in that shadow. It's all flash in the pan. It's all over. Meant nothing. And it was actually a very cool sort of strategy. Instead of denouncing him, he wouldn't say anything about it. He had some of his associates denounce him, but he was above the subject. He always tried not to mention the name, and it worked. It just wasn't. He wasn't in the arena anymore. But I still think that status really is the key to so much. I wrote the right stuff from that point of view. I have the ordinary boy's interest in rockets and all that, but it's really to see one of the astronauts. Let me think of which one it was. Begging the Society of Test Pilots to accept them. Okay, we haven't done this and this and this, but this is a good program. And here's the rest of the world's idolizing them. Those things are, I think, really revealing.
Revealing, yeah. Since you mentioned that, that being a missionary is very much looked down by the intellectuals, but in reality, yourself are a powerful intellectual. And what's wrong with the fact that the Prospect Foreign Policy poll in 2005 named Chomsky #1 intellectual in the world, doubling Umberto Eco, for instance? What's wrong according to you in that decision?
You mean how could that happen?
Yeah, how could that happen? And according to you, is that a mistake?
Well, I think that Chomsky's fame in the scientific area, and very few people understood what on earth he was talking about. When that suddenly was, he was a star in the intellectual and political area.
Yes.
I think it's called the I think it's called some kind of effect in philosophy, and so the two things kept bouncing off each other, and he became better and better known.
The Matthew effect. The Matthew effect. I think if you have something, you become even more famous, and then you become. It feeds on itself. Yeah. It's after Saint Matthew. Yeah.
And then he also had, and still has a real charisma.
Yeah.
And charisma, all by itself, is a fascinating subject. And charismatic people don't tell jokes. Because most jokes assume that, we all screw up and look at this one, look at that one. And it's not a comfortable for somebody who wants to be on top of the world. It was as much as his charisma as anything else But he did have a mechanistic theory of evolution. He thought that there was what he at first called a language organ. The problem is organs are discrete mechanisms, and a kidney looks like a kidney, and a stomach looks like a stomach, and they don't look like anything else. And he kept saying, well, it's hidden in the brain. After a while, he dropped that organ business. He hung on to the universal grammar, which is kind of like blood that circulates through what he called the deep structure, whatever that may be, and was picked up by the LAD, the language acquisition device. It was all very physical in his telling. And he really managed to make linguistics look like a real science, which I doubt it really could be called that. It is interesting about its peculiarities that people have. But I can't really argue the science versus no science.
But would you go that far to describe him as he has done about many other different characters, a charlatan, a fraud?
I'll say that again.
Yes. Would you go as far as to define Chomsky a charlatan, a fraud?
Oh, no, because I think he really believes. I think he really believes all this. And I've never heard of him chuckling and saying, they thought that was the gospel truth. No, I think he dead serious. I was a little surprised that he talked to me, but he did.
Yeah, surprising.
He was very, certainly very straightforward, sincere about the whole thing. Are you getting too much light over here? No.
Yes. Do you mind if I close a little bit?
Please
This
do.
one? Maybe also this one. Okay.
That'll actually cool the room off a little bit.
Yeah, it's perfect right now. How long did you talk with him? How many times and how long?
I just interviewed him once.
Once.
For about an hour, I guess.
No. Okay. In Boston?
No, it was on the telephone.
Oh, on the telephone. Okay. But he was very much pissed off by your book, or?
You know, I don't really know. He, as far as I know, has not passed any, blanket judgment like
Yeah.
not worth. He has picked up a couple of points where I said that, or he thought I was saying that his views in the time of, say, the war in Vietnam were just fashionable views, and that he went to demonstrations through which he had no danger of really suffering. But I didn't actually say that. In fact, I mentioned that he actually started an organization called Resist.
Yeah.
And was jailed a number of times. And if they had gotten, if the government had gotten really angry at him, they could have given him real trouble. But that's ironic, because it's like saying Well, I really was brave. Come on. I mean, that's the
Well,
least thing he has to worry about.
yeah. Well, still, he was looking for recognition in a way. You wanted to have your benediction in a way.
Yeah.
Okay. And on the other side, why do you like Dan Everett so much?
Because I so agree with the notion, which is also his, that speech did not come to people naturally. It's nobody will ever know. I don't think where it started, but if you can believe any of this going back in hundreds of thousands of years in time, I'm not sure you can believe it. It seems to be a reasonably new acquisition. But I still don't know if that's true. I don't know how on earth human beings survived. We're really weak.
Yeah.
Compared to
big apes or
actually even if a chicken weighed 150 pounds, he might beat us, and if we don't have a gun or something, it's very, very possible. He's got long claws, but somehow men did, and then human beings who spoke control the world, and it's all because of the trick of memory.
Mnemonics, as you call it. Yeah.
And I was surprised that no reviewers quite understood my brilliant solution to the whole problem, which was mnemonics and so on. But I can't ask for everything. But it's actually simple if you can come up with a code that's short enough to enable you to identify things that have happened. That's the beginning of memory.
You have already touched this in a way, but I would ask you to speculate a little more about this dichotomy in the field versus ivory tower, because this is very present in your characterization of Chomsky versus Everett, for instance. I mean, is there an underground anti-intellectual polemics going on? I mean, you were the champion of being on the field, even if you studied a lot at university, you were very bright, but then you choose to be a journalist, so meaning that if you had to go on the bus with Ken Kesey, you did it. I mean, it's not that you didn't read it on the books.
That's one of the main points of my vanity is that I'm willing to go just about anywhere, and I have gone out. I'm always among people I have nothing in common with. And I finally gave up trying to fit in to anybody and became the man from Mars. Well, gee, I'm here. It looks interesting. What are you doing? And it is amazing, though, that before Chomsky, everybody in linguistics was in the field. The idea was you were going to little-known places or out-of-the-way places. You want to record their linguistic use of words. And sheer charisma. Chomsky didn't want any of that. He managed to make it in a way superior to going out in the field. If you went out in the field, he didn't use this word, but you were you were a fly catcher. And the big
but it's not Chomsky that used that term. It's you who used that term. I think. I mean, for sure, you use that term often, also talking about Wallace.
I did, but they didn't use that term.
Yeah. So, in a way, in his effort to transform linguistics into a hard science, Chomsky thought that it wasn't worth it to go on the field anymore because you had more scientific method to apply.
Well, he believed he had a particular philosophical view that said everything in life had a pattern. It's very Platonic.
Yeah.
And there's an ideal, typical pattern, and whatever we do is some form of the ideal, typical pattern. And so it was much greater to be able to stay up high and see the whole pattern and tell people the pattern. And that's really what he had against Everett. Everett was saying, there is no Platonic pattern. And here I found some people who don't use linguistics at all. The way
Yeah. No recursion, no.
Yeah. And I see that he has pretty much backed off recursion too.
Yeah. Apparently, yeah. What in the first half of your book, when you talk about Darwin and Wallace, you say that it's misleading to say that human beings evolved from animals, or no? That you said that this is a quote from an NPR interview that you gave. Do you question Darwin in general, or just the human part of evolution?
Well, I have my doubts, although I have no alternative about evolution per se. It's a wonderful explanation for things because you don't need any explanation. If you say, well, this turned into that, well, it's because certain forces made that necessary. And it doesn't pass. I believe I came up with 5 standards for testing an hypothesis. One is, did someone see this change or event happen and somehow record it? Was someone able to duplicate the theory on his own? And there was the negativity theory of Popper.
Yeah. If you could falsify. Yeah.
If you can't, he was saying, if you can't translate it into terms that in themselves falsify it, then it's not good. And then if it leads to a new path in science, that's a sign that it's the real thing. Or if it just illuminates something that already exists. And it really doesn't it doesn't pass any of them. That's not a real hypothesis. Well, you can't make a theory out of it. It's an hypothesis. Anybody can come up with an hypothesis, but you can't you can't turn it into a theory. And the only person I've seen address that point is Jerry Coyne,
Mm-hmm.
who said that let's see, how did he put it? That people he said the very fact that people came up with the theory of evolution was a sign that that they had replicated it. But I think that I find that a rather specious argument. And they really haven't answered that whole question.
Yeah. Linked to this, aren't you afraid to become with this book against your will, maybe a kind of poster boy of creationist or people like that who strongly question the Darwin theory?
Oh, they are dying to cast me as a creationist.
Yes.
And I hate people go around saying I'm an atheist, but I'm an atheist. And it's better not said. You just go by what your own convictions. But I don't think I've ever shown a single religious sign. But as I say, they would love, and because it's easy. That there are people who believe 100% in the theory of evolution, but they believe God did it, and they are reserved for a special hell among the believers in evolution. If they put on this facade of understanding it. It's probably should not say this, but the status of God is not very great. The Christian God, anyway,
Yeah.
Or for that matter, the Hebrew God is not in good shape either. Whereas I think Allah is doing
He's doing better.
People really believe. And I don't think they dare say otherwise in most Muslim countries. It's not just he has a different opinion. That isn't the way it works.
Yeah, you're an atheist even if you come from a family who was at least your mother. I think she was religious, right?
Yes, and my father read the Bible a lot, but he never went to church. My mother went to church to part of church activities.
Yeah.
And I never arrived at a breaking point where I wanted to announce, the hell with it, just go your own way.
Okay. Have you seen in the last issue, maybe the last but one issue of Harper's, there was a kind of letter of rebuttal. I think it was Pezeski who said that you made a caricature out of them because Harper ran an extract of your book. Huh?
Go over that again. I don't quite
Oh
get
yes,
the point.
yes. On Harper's Magazine, there was a rebuttal. It was a letter
Yes.
by I think it was Pezeski or one of
Yes,
the three.
You're right.
and this
Kazetsky, and there was also
Yeah. Nevins, I think.
yes,
Yeah, yeah,
Alfred Nevins.
yeah. And they said that you made a. I mean, basically, he said you made a caricature out of them, and what was your reaction to that, if there was any?
Well, I didn't consciously say I'm going to make fun of them, but I ended up doing that. I guess by referring to them as the Truth Squad,
Yeah, yeah.
and which is like something out of George Orwell.
Yes. Okay.
And I really I thought Chomsky came off fairly well in my version, in that he turned the whole field around, dominated it absolutely for 60 years at least, and he still is the most, even to this day, the most potent voice in linguistics. I compared him to, oh my God, I compared him to William the Conqueror was one.
Yes.
That's pretty heady stuff. The people who had they don't wait in their 20s, they take over.
So, according to you, he doesn't have any reason to be mad at you.
Well, no, I think he should be, and maybe he's not angry. He hasn't expressed it that way. I'm sure he always expresses it in a way that says, "What difference does it make what he says?"
Okay. So this one was the part about book. Do you mind if I try and close it again? Because
I think
I made a mistake. I just closed the lower part, but it's better if I try. Okay, like this is much better. Okay. Yes. Okay. Now I'll try to bring you on more current affairs. Okay. Which is, I mean, everybody's talking about it right now. I mean, tonight will be the last debate among the two presidential candidates. Don't you see any similarity between Charlie Crocker and Donald Trump? Because I've seen some. I mean, I like better Charlie Crocker, but still. Yeah.
What is quite similar is that real estate developers are like lone rangers, really, and they usually don't have any real organization in the usual sense of that word. And in their own minds, they tend to become stars. And I think that's certainly true in the case of Donald Trump. And what makes his case even more interesting is that he has no, as far as I can tell, he has no serious organized thoughts about the world or the campaign or anything. I think nobody would ever right now could predict anything that he would do. But at the same time, has said things that, because of political correctness, others haven't dared say, and that's appreciated. Now it's gotten down to who's the dirtiest old man in town. I mean, it's really gotten a very low, gotten to a very low level, and I swear, I think the opinion polls are right. Neither candidate is liked enough to whip up any enthusiasm.
Yeah.
And whereas Bill Clinton was a marvel at charming people.
Yeah.
Apparently, she has no charm whatsoever. A big article in the paper yesterday, I forget which one it is, about her being unable to get along with her own security attendants. And even before that, I can remember reading what seemed, this came from one of the Arkansas state troops. Does that ring any bell for you?
Yeah. Yeah.
This was some time ago, and I met one of them, and he said that Bill Clinton was terrified of her, and that he had a meeting on the day that he was 30 hours from his being sworn in as president. He had a meeting in the State House in Little Rock.
Yeah.
At 5:30 in the morning with a young woman. And this, and it took place not in the office, but in the cellar. And that he, the state trooper, had stood at the top of the stairs in case the enemy should arrive. The enemy was not Soviet Union or any recognized military threat. It was Hillary. And that she was very abusive in language to him. Now, I can't vouch for any for any of that, but that has been the perceived personalities. It would be hard to be as really winsome in personality as Bill Clinton. I mean, he could walk into any room and he remembers wives' names. That's one of the most potent things a politician can do.
Who's this? Are you talking about Bill Clinton now, or no? Who's the one who can remember every single name?
Oh, that's Bill Clinton.
Bill Clinton. Yeah. That's what I thought. Yeah. Which is a real politician. Yeah, but I don't know if I don't remember now where I've read it. Maybe it was on an interview in the Australian newspaper, which says that you were seriously undecided between him and Hillary. Is still true?
it's still true. I have no idea what I'm going to do.
The time is running short.
Well, I consider Hillary Clinton bad news for many reasons, but I don't know what kind of news Trump is going to be. I've read that he already has the longed-for satisfaction, which is being the most famous person in the country,
Yes.
if not the world,
Yeah.
at this point. But I really do not know. And in a way, it seems useless to vote for somebody else entirely from the Libertarian Party, because you know it's not going to make any difference. So it's a moral quandary that I'm in. But it's only one vote.
Yes, but because I was surprised, to be honest with you, that you were still on the side. I mean, I couldn't imagine anyone more far away from you. I mean, in manners and sophistication and anything. I mean, if you look at you, anything about Trump, I don't see a single common ground between you and him. And still, I mean, of course, I do agree with the fact that Hillary Clinton is not likable at all, to say the least. Okay, but still, I mean, she belongs more to a world in which you have something in common, while Donald Trump, it could be from planet Mars compared to you.
It's true. Even someone like Ronald Reagan, who was a movie actor, he paid his political dues. He became governor of California and so forth. I was just trying to think if there's anybody who had run for a major party for president who had absolutely no. I can't get it off the top of my head.
Yeah, I mean, Reagan had been governor of California.
Yeah, and which is
so he was a good. Yeah, he was a good president. Yeah.
He'd gone through a surprisingly good campaign to become that.
While Trump, he has no experience. He didn't pay his federal taxes for 18 years. And he goes like, I mean, he brag about this is verbatim, grabbing women by the pussy. I mean, it's not me, it's him. I mean, I'm having a hard time to understand how you could still be a little bit undecided.
Well, I guess it more has to do with a rather low opinion of Hillary Clinton. And in a way, I would like to have reason to vote for Trump, but I can't find one yet.
Okay. Talking about politics, but in a more general sense. In a recent interview, this time was on the Australian. You, in a way, you admit that globalization was a big mistake because it has created more poor than rich, and we at least in Western society. Nevertheless, in that same interview, you appreciate Reagan and you make fun of Occupy Wall Street. Isn't there a contradiction? I mean, globalization became important during the years in which Reagan and Thatcher were the most important people in US and the UK. Don't you see a contradiction about criticizing globalization, as many people are doing now? Also, the International Monetary Fund are now reconsidering globalization. The Economist is doing that, and so on and so forth. And don't you see a contradiction between being a fan of Ronald Reagan and being a critic of globalization?
I don't see that. It's the not that I consider myself a great political sage. I'm not. But from the very beginning, as soon as this globalization was announced, I think it became popular during Clinton's administration. I said to myself, this is going to be great for corporations for about 5 years. That they'll have hugely reduced costs of manufacturing.
Yeah.
And the argument of the business interest was that people would be retrained to do better jobs. And if there's anyone who was retrained, I don't know where that person is. Retrained? Are you kidding? So finally, you get to the point where these people who had, let's say, decent jobs don't have any jobs, and that's a big point of contention right now. And many people with jobs just don't have the type of job that they know they can do. And that is good for Trump's cause also. But I mean, that's the worst policy. You take the jobs to Bangladesh. At first, they usually go from agricultural jobs, for example, went from the northern U.S. to the south because it was cheaper wages. But now these things are going to still cheaper wages in other countries. In the state of North Carolina, I have read that there is no native of any description who will any longer pick cotton. It's all done by Mexicans.
Yeah.
It's unpleasant work. You're in a broiling sun. It's cotton has thorns, and it's a messy job.
Yeah.
But it's just astonishing. No American will take that job.
Yeah. Well, maybe now in the near future, these same jobs won't be offshored anymore because we will have machines and robots who will do the same jobs. That can be the next thing.
Yeah, that's really going to be trouble.
Okay. I've read a very interesting, beautiful article by Michael Lewis about you, which came out on Vanity Fair a couple of years ago. It made me think that, I mean, you have always been very good at poking fun at cultural gatekeepers, no? I mean, it seems to have been always your elective sport. Liberals in the radical chic, pretentious modern art, the painted world, harsh modern architecture from Bauhaus to Bauhaus. But being a cultural gatekeeper yourself, why do you disparage them so much? Why do you disparage them so much? Why do you critique them so much? Don't you think that you are a cultural gatekeeper yourself? You invented a language in a way. I mean, at least a journalistic language.
Well, I think since nobody else seems to bring up some of these points, like the painted word, that suddenly art was more what is said about it than what it looks like. I said, well, I guess it's up to me. And in that book, incidentally, I don't pass any aesthetic judgments. There's certain artists I don't make look too great, but it's not because of their work. It's always their beliefs, their artistic principles. In fact, in my bigger books, as I think of them, such as the electric Kool-Aid acid test,
Yeah.
The Right Stuff, or the Bonfire of the Vanities, let's say.
Yeah.
There's really no political angle. I'm far more interested in just trying to explain how these things work or how they could have happened, rather than getting across any sort of moral point. Some people, some intellectuals, let's say, were surprised that I gave such a favorable picture of the astronauts. Well, I didn't set out to give a favorable picture. I think I just got it right. And the same would be, I mean, you could easily have made, one could have easily made fun of the astronauts. But that didn't interest me. And right now I'm tempted to do a book on political correctness. But it's really not to scold people who practice political correctness, as I don't think anyone has come up with a real explanation of what it is. And it's very different from the attitude of young people in the universities in the 1960s, time of Vietnam. It's right now I think of it as the joy of anger. I think it's fun to be a bully. I'm tempted to call it the bully boys. The famous, I guess the most famous single case happened at Yale last October, when at the time of Halloween, when the wife of the head of a college, as they call the dormitories at Yale, wrote a blog in which she said, naturally, we all try to stop short of insulting anybody and so forth. But Halloween is different. Halloween is a time of mischief, and that's been its role. You can do and say things at Halloween supposedly that are not all that civilized. But that was all it took, and immediately the politically correct students rose up, and there was on YouTube was a scene that became famous in which the students confronted, but it wasn't a mob, it was just a lot of students confronted her husband, who was the master. No, they don't say master anymore, they say head of this college, and said things to him, I don't remember the exact words,
Yeah.
but on the level of, oh, you asshole, and things like that. And he was utterly taken aback by this. He couldn't believe what was happening. And then it became a kind of orgy of hatred or just sheer disapproval. And his wife, who was teaching at Yale at the time, left the job, and he took a leave of absence, even though he didn't, and eventually retired from the faculty.
Unbelievable. Yeah. I didn't know about this story. Yeah.
It's astonishing that this would happen, but I think it is not. I think it's not political in the ordinary sense. Sometimes it's just fun to disapprove of people, particularly if you have people backing you.
Yeah, this brings me to another story about your past this time. Because apparently you have been always very good as a social satirist. I've stumbled into a letter from you, aged 12, in which you were making fun of a schoolmate, David McDaniel, if I'm not mistaken. Where does this wit come from? I mean, you were raised and born in a very proper, traditional family. You are incredibly kind, at least.
But I don't.
Where does this?
I don't recognize the one you just mentioned. David.
David McDaniel.
David McDaniel.
Yeah, it used to. It was a schoolmate of yours when you were 12, around 12.
I don't recognize that name at all.
Okay,
Where did
because
that come from?
I took it from the article in the Vanity Fair from Michael Lewis.
Michael Lewis.
Yeah.
I'll have to look that
Yeah.
up because it doesn't ring
Any bells? Okay. Yeah, but still, apart from that, do you recognize that this satirist vein is inside you, despite of your appearance, despite of the fact that you're so sophisticated, so well mannered, and it's like you got two Tom Wolfe inside you, the one that everyone sees, and the other one which comes out only in front of a blank page.
Well, I never start out saying, well, I'm going to satirize somebody or I'm going to make fun of somebody. Some people I just can't seem to take altogether seriously. Whatever attitude I take happens. I take in the process of writing rather than having a plan and a saber or even a razor drawn. It's and I can't and the word satire to me means it contains a big element of exaggeration. And I'm never conscious of exaggerating. It could still happen, but having been a newspaper man for so long, I still believe in accuracy.
Yes, of course, but you're definitely accurate. But the language you use often, I mean, the depiction that you give of Chomsky himself is that you make fun of him. I mean, you also recognize that he's a larger than life character, and you recognize that. But still, if I was Chomsky, I wouldn't be. I mean, I would be honored that you took the pain of writing about me, but still. I mean, you make fun of him.
Well, I think, no, I was sorry to say, I think I was the first person who ever brought out breadth and strength of his power. But that's not true. There are others. There are others.
Anyway, I want to bring you back to another phase of your life, at your Yale dissertation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it was about the communist influences on American writers from 1928 to 1942. The dean rejected it because at first, because it slanted to disparage them, and you didn't take it lightly. Did you think that America was under threat then by communism, and it is today? We talk a lot about Putin right now. What's your take on the communist menace then and now?
Well, there was a much greater concentration of communist power if you go back to the 1940s, right after the Second World War. First there was this strange interlude of the Communist Party suddenly becoming very neutral on the Nazis.
Yeah.
It was the Nazi-Soviet Pact in 1939 started that. And so the communists themselves stopped the rhetoric on that point and stopped attacking Americans at that point. It was very embarrassing for them, I'm sure. But then after the war was when Reagan became a prominent figure, because he tried to block the influence of the Communist Party. I do not remember whether it was in the actors organization or whether it was the actors and the writers. But that's how he became well known. And I don't know how serious it was, but it was definitely an opportunity there for the Communist Party to gain a lot more power because they had been on our side during the war. And at the time, people were most intellectual, I would say. And an intellectual, by the way, is a usually slightly left-leaning, or at least slightly left-leaning person who feels intellectually superior to the population around him. You don't have to have done anything to become an intellectual. It's surely a belief in your own superiority. Probably helps if you have an academic record or you're a writer or something like that. And that was the famous interlude of the Hollywood 10. Dalton Trumbo and so on. And that was a great turning point because even though intellectuals, again, it's left-leaning people who feel superior, even though they despised the House Committee on Un-American Activities, to this day they call it the House Un-American Activities Committee. They don't call it by its name, which is the House Committee on Un-American Activities. Even though they despise these congressional committees, it chastened them a lot, and they just began to drop out of the various movements, like the attempt to take over the Writers Guild. Was it called the Writers Guild? Anyway.
I think it was. And what about today? I mean, yeah, we talk a lot about Putin. There's been rumors that we could assist to a new cyber war between America and Russia, because I mean, as you know, Trump invited Russian hackers to get into Hillary Clinton email and so on and so forth. But also Obama has been very tough in saying that. I mean, Russian spies shouldn't dare, Russian hackers shouldn't dare to get. I mean, there's been very strong words. What do you think about the situation, this reenactment of USA versus Russia? Anyway?
There has been suddenly, to me, it's sudden emphasis on cyber warfare. I can't even explain to you what it is. I know it involves machinery I don't know how to run. Even to the point of very knowledgeable people saying we've got to create a department of cyber something. I don't know what they call it, warfare. And apparently it's so far, in the light of all the so-called hacking and everything, has proven to be a real weapon of some kind. I think the United States at this point is still in a good position to fight that off. But I'm all eyes and ears because it's so new to me.
And what about China? Do you see it as a threat to the US right now? I mean, what are the biggest geopolitical threat to US right now? China or ISIS or what? I mean, of course, they are very different things, but still.
Well, and now I'm quoting someone, and I can't remember his name, who said about 25, 30 years ago, I think I can come up with the name somewhere, that we ended a period in which national borders mean less and less, and that the wars of the future will be fought by gangs, which is to say, and ISIS is probably the best example of people who do not recognize these artificial boundaries, which in many cases are left over from the First World War. And will completely change international relations because they're amorphous. And now, for the first time, there's news that the combating of ISIS is becoming effective. But I don't put any faith in. I don't put any faith in that. And ever since, this is a pretty obvious reaction, but ever since 9/11, I've really felt that some convulsion has occurred. It probably occurred before 9/11. And I really do think it has shaken shaken people's confidence, because it was just in 1997 that Fukuyama wrote
The End of History.
End of History. And I think he gave about 2 paragraphs to Islam, in which he said, despite appearances, there's much greater belief in liberal democracy in the Middle East than you would believe.
Excuse me.
Hey.
What you have another interview?
I'm sorry?
You have another interview.
Oh, that's right. Thank
Oh,
you.
okay.
Thank you, Renee. That's
Okay.
right.
Do we have 10 minutes?
Hmm?
Do we have 10 minutes?
Oh, sure.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, sorry, you were finishing it with Fukuyama.
Oh,
Yeah.
it was the end of history, meaning that now liberal democracy is the shining light of the entire world, even the countries of Islam, even though it doesn't look like
Yeah, yeah.
it.
Okay.
I mean, great scholars should never predict.
Okay. Last 2 questions. I'll make them quicker. A synthetic judgment on the Obama presidency. Do you think it was good, bad, we will miss him, or?
At first, I thought he was very wise not to react to every provocation, because
Yeah.
the United States has a lot of power in practically every area that there were problems. But I think he pushed that a little too far. I mean, it was smart to hold back, but he should at least give demonstrations of ability to be furious. That he hasn't done.
Okay.
What is it? It's, I think, really interesting that here's a black president has occurred in a powerful country and of the West first, in the country that was so slave-ridden for much of its history, and I think it wasn't done. There was no sense of guilt about it either. I think he was. He kind of handled himself impeccably as a politician when he won the election.
If you should single out a single thing that he has done in these 8 years that you appreciated, or that you didn't appreciate, I mean, you didn't appreciate, it didn't show that you have the ability to get furious, but something that you have appreciated in these last 8 years?
I can't think of anything positive that has been accomplished. And that's me talking. I can only think of things that have been averted. Whereas the ideal was somebody like Reagan, because the other side always felt that he might go off his noggin at any time and do crazy things. They also feared, apparently, they feared George W. Bush because he had a deep religious streak.
Yeah.
I once visited the Capitol and had a lunch meeting with some people not terribly high in the hierarchies there. And I was so surprised they gave, at lunch, for about 8 people, they gave a Christian blessing before before they ate lunch. That was so uncommon at that time. And religious people can go off to that terrible swift sword if they
Yes. Okay, very last question. About journalism. A career like yours would be possible today in the age of digital journalism? Do you think it would be possible to have, if you were young today, if you came from Springfield Union and and you came to New York, it would be possible for the same Tom Wolfe, if you were young now, to have the same career that you had?
I think it would be very difficult. I arrived at the New York Herald Tribune at a time when they were really fighting to just stay in business against the New York Times, and so they were willing to try all sorts of things, such as what I wrote, such as what Jimmy Breslin wrote, which used these techniques of, which ordinarily you find only in fiction.
Yeah.
And actually, Rolling Stone used to run extremely long articles by Hunter Thompson.
Yeah.
And so the attitude was, as long as it's good, just keep on going. There's no restriction, which was diametrically against conventional thought, which was that young people can't tolerate long stretches of writing anymore. But I think if the writer is as good as Hunter Thompson, they can do it. And the 1,000-page novels still are high on, or can be on the bestseller list. Well, I used a lot of tricks I don't know that can be done now. For example, I figured, and if you're writing for a magazine, particularly a Sunday supplement,
Yeah.
if you can get the person, the reader, to turn the page, you may succeed in getting to finish the piece. So that's when I wrote this piece that began with the word hernia, repeated enough times so I knew that the reader would have to turn the page.
Which one?
Hernia.
Okay.
It
Yeah.
begins with hernia, 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 hernia. It was the sound of the croupier in Las Vegas casinos
Yeah.
getting the crowd warmed up. Maybe those things would still work, I don't know.
And on a very last note about this, and then we're done. Yeah, talking about today journalism, because there is a current wisdom which says, in the age of Twitter, people don't want to engage in long form journalism and so on and so forth. Do you think that this critique has some ground, or you don't think so?
It's already reached the point that in this whole area of offshoots of the internet, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, and there are no stars. I cannot think of a single famous writer who works in any of those areas. I mean, I may have forgotten somebody, but I can't think of it. Which is a sign to me that it's not being taken all that seriously. It's just something you can sort of snack on. And the fact that there are now so many blogs. It's like what Marshall McLuhan predicted. He said back in 1968. He said we have reached a point where the minds of an entire generation have been altered by television. And he said television turns people tribal. Don't ask me to explain anything. And a tribal people, if handed a piece of paper with writing on it, assume it's a trick. They'll only believe what the next person whispers in their ear. And that's what blogs are. Completely unchecked. And it doesn't seem to matter to people. So I honestly have no idea what's going to become of all that. It has reduced the power of the pen, except we don't use pens anymore.
The power of?
I said it's reduced the power of the pen, but we don't use pens anymore.
Yeah.
Well, actually, you're using one.
Okay. Thank you very much.